The desert stretched endlessly before her, a canvas of amber sand and merciless sun. Emma's bare feet burned against the scorching ground, each step a reminder that she had nowhere left to go. Her dress, once white, now hung in tatters, stained with dust and the salt of dried tears. Hey there, thanks for being here. Leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you think of the story. Let's keep going. She had been walking for hours, or was it days? Time seemed to dissolve in the heat waves that danced before her eyes. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of wind across the dunes and her own labored breathing. There's nothing left, she whispered to the vast emptiness, her voice cracking like the parched earth beneath her feet. Behind her lay a life she could no longer claim as her own. Ahead stretched nothing but sand and sky, offering neither mercy nor promise. She had no water, no food, no destination. Just the burning certainty that she would rather die free in this wasteland than return to the cage that had once been called home. Emma collapsed to her knees, her hands sinking into the hot sand. The desert was indifferent to her pain. Vast and ancient in its silence, she closed her eyes, feeling the sun press down on her shoulders like a weight she could no longer carry. In that moment of surrender, she didn't notice the figure watching her from the shadow of a distant rock formation, patient as the desert itself. Eli had been tracking the woman's progress across the desert for 3 days. From his vantage point among the red rocks, he watched her stumble and fall, rise and continue. Driven by something stronger than survival instinct, most people would have turned back by now, or simply laid down to die. But not her. She moved like a wounded animal, desperate but determined. Her dark hair whipped around her face in the desert wind, and even from this distance, he could see the fierce set of her shoulders. She reminded him of the wolves that sometimes wandered too far from their pack, lost, but still hunting for a way home. Where? He murmured in his native tongue, the word carried away by the wind. Eli knew these lands like the lines on his weathered hands, born to the dying people. He had spent 43 years learning the desert's moods, its gifts, and its cruelties. He knew where the hidden springs bubbled up from deep earth, which plants could sustain life, and which rocks provided the best shelter from the scorching sun. He also knew when someone was running for more than just the heat. The woman collapsed again, this time staying down longer. Eli shifted, his callous fingers drumming against the smooth stone. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. Asterisk, the desert tests everyone, grandson. Some it claims, others it teaches. Your job is to know the difference. Asterisk, 3 years had passed since he'd spoken to another human being by choice. 3 years since he'd buried his wife, Sarah, and their 2 children beneath the cottonwood trees near the old trading post. 3 years of choosing solitude over the well-meaning sympathy of his community. But something about this woman's struggle stirred something in him he'd thought long dead. She was trying to stand again, her legs shaking with exhaustion. Eli watched as she took one more step, then another, her jaw set with stubborn determination. She would die out there if he didn't intervene. The desert was beautiful but unforgiving, and she was already beyond the point of rational decision-making. He gathered his water pouch and the small medicine bundle his grandmother had given him decades ago. The leather was worn smooth from years of handling, the beadwork faded but still intact. Inside were herbs for healing, sage for cleansing, and tobacco for prayers. Moving with the quiet grace of a man who belonged to this land, Eli began his descent from the rocky outcropping. He would approach slowly, carefully. Desert creatures, human or otherwise, could be dangerous when cornered and desperate. The woman had stopped moving entirely now, sitting in the sand with her head bowed. Her shoulders shook, though whether from exhaustion, heat, or tears, he couldn't tell from this distance. As he drew closer, Eli could see the raw blisters on her feet, the sunburn angry across her exposed shoulders. Her dress had once been fine, the kind of garment worn by women who'd never known hunger or thirst. But something had driven her from the comfortable world into this harsh one. She chose the desert over whatever she left behind, Eli said quietly. To himself, that takes courage. 20 feet away, he stopped and crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening. He waited, patient as the ancient stones around them, for her to notice his presence. In his experience, healing began not with rescue, but with choice. She would need to choose to accept his help, just as she had chosen to enter the desert in the first place. The wind shifted, carrying his scent toward her. Slowly, very slowly, the woman raised her head. Emma's vision blurred as she lifted her head. The desert heat creating mirages that danced at the edges of her consciousness. For a moment, she thought the figure crouched nearby was another hallucination, her mind's desperate attempt to conjure rescue from the emptiness. But the man didn't waver like the phantom oases she'd been chasing. He remained solid, real, patient as carved stone. His weathered face showed no judgment, no pity, only a quiet watchfulness that reminded her of the hawks that circled overhead. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The single word scraped her throat raw. Eli didn't move closer, didn't rush to her side as others might have. Instead, he slowly pulled a leather water pouch from his belt and set it on the sand between them. The gesture was deliberate, respectful, and offering rather than an imposition. Emma stared at the pouch as if it might disappear. Her lips were cracked, her tongue swollen with thirst. But something held her back. Trust had been beaten out of her long ago, replaced by an instinctive wariness of any kindness that came without visible strings attached. Water, Eli said simply, his voice gravelly from disuse. No tricks, no cost. The words hung in the desert air. Emma studied his face, searching for the familiar signs of deception, manipulation, control. She found none. His dark eyes held depth and sadness, but also something she'd forgotten existed: genuine compassion without expectation. With trembling hands, she reached for the pouch. The leather was worn from the sun but smooth with age and care. She uncapped it and let a small amount of water touch her lips, then forced herself to drink slowly despite every instinct screaming at her to gulp it down. The water tasted like life itself. Thank you, she managed, capping the pouch and offering it back. Eli shook his head. Keep it. You need it more than I do. I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had given her something without immediately calculating what they could take in return? She couldn't remember. Eli stood slowly, his movements careful and unthreatening. There's shade about a mile from here. Shelter. Food if you want it. Emma's body screamed yes, but her mind rebelled. Shelter meant walls, and walls could become cages. Food meant debt, and debt meant ownership. She learned these lessons too well to forget them now. I can't, she said, struggling to her feet. I have to keep moving. To where? The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. Where was she going? What was her plan beyond simply putting distance between herself and the life she'd fled? She had no destination, no goal except the vague hope that somehow, somewhere, she might find a place where she could simply exist without belonging to anyone. I don't know, she admitted finally. Eli nodded as if this made perfect sense. Then, there's no hurry to get there. He began walking away, not back toward wherever he'd come from, but in the direction she'd been heading. After a few steps, he paused and looked back. My name is Eli, he said. I won't hurt you. I won't force you. But the desert will kill you if you keep going like this. He gestured toward the endless expanse of sand and rock. Out there, you'll die alone. With me, you might live long enough to figure out what comes next. Emma watched him resume walking, his pace slow enough that she could follow if she chose. He didn't look back again, didn't pressure her with words or gestures. He simply offered her a choice, the first real choice she'd been given in years. She stood there for long minutes, the water pouch heavy in her hands, watching his figure grow smaller against the vast landscape. Behind her lay everything she'd run from. Ahead stretched the unknown, dangerous and uncertain, but somehow less frightening than the known cruelties she'd escaped. Taking a deep breath, Emma took her first step forward, then another. The choice was hers to make, and for the first time, in memory, that felt like everything. The shelter wasn't what Emma had expected. Hidden in a natural alcove between towering red rocks, it was more cave than building a space carved by wind and water over countless centuries. A simple lean-to of weathered wood and canvas extended from the rock face, creating additional shade and protection from the elements. Eli had spoken the truth about shade and water. A small spring trickled from the rocks, forming a clear pool. Before disappearing back into the earth, desert wildflowers grew nearby, their bright blooms defiant against the harsh landscape. "It's not much," Eli said, settling onto a flat rock near the spring. "But it's safe." Emma remained standing at the edge of the shelter, her body tense despite her exhaustion. The space felt too enclosed, too much like the room she'd been trapped in before. Her breathing quickened as familiar panic clawed at her chest. Eli noticed her distress immediately. Without a word, he stood and walked to the far side of the area, giving her more space. He busied himself with building a small fire, his movements deliberate and calm. "You can leave any time," he said quietly, not looking at her. "No one's keeping you here." The words cut through her rising panic like cool water. Emma forced herself to breathe slowly, deeply. She was not trapped. She had choices. The difference between this moment and her past was that simple and that profound. Gradually, she allowed herself to move deeper into the shelter. The rock walls bore faded paintings, handprints, animals, symbols she didn't recognize but somehow found comforting. They spoke of other people who had found refuge here, who had marked their presence and moved on. "Did you make these?" she asked, touching a red handprint with her fingertips. Eli shook his head. "They're old. My grandfather's grandfather might have seen the people who painted them." He fed small twigs to the growing fire. "This place has been a sanctuary for a long time." A sanctuary. The word resonated in Emma's chest. When had she last felt truly safe? She couldn't remember, even in her childhood, before everything went wrong. There had always been the underlying tension, the walking on eggshells, the careful monitoring of her father's moods. Eli pulled out provisions from a hide-bag, dried meat, some kind of flatbread, berries she didn't recognize. He offered them to her without ceremony, as naturally as he'd offered the water. "I'm not hungry," Emma lied, though her stomach cramped with emptiness. "The food will keep," Eli said simply. "Eat when you're ready." He settled back against the rock wall, close enough to the fire to tend it, but far enough from Emma that she didn't feel crowded. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it felt purposeful, like the quiet spaces between words and a prayer. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Emma finally allowed herself to sit. The ground was surprisingly soft here, covered with sand that had blown in over the years and small, resilient plants that cushioned the rocky surface. "What do you call this place?" she asked. "I don't have a name for it in English," Eli replied. "In Dine, we might say it's a place where the earth holds you gently." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the truth of those words. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt held rather than trapped, supported rather than confined. "Why are you helping me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Eli was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, I needed help. No one came." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the darkening sky. "Maybe that's just how it goes sometimes. Maybe that's okay. But I figure if I can be the one who comes this time, then maybe the circle gets a little more complete." Emma opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked. She saw the grief etched in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried some invisible weight. He wasn't helping her from a place of abundance or superiority. He was helping her from his own brokenness, and somehow that made all the difference. I don't even know your name, Eli said gently. Emma's throat tightened. Her name belonged to a life she'd rejected, to people who had used it as a tool of control and ownership. But sitting here in this ancient sanctuary, watching the fire dance between them, she felt the first stirring of something she thought was gone forever. The possibility of choosing who she wanted to be. I don't know either, she admitted. Not anymore. Emma woke before dawn, her body jolting from sleep with the practiced alertness of someone who had learned that safety was always temporary. For a moment, panic flooded her system as she struggled to remember where she was. Then she heard the gentle trickle of the spring and saw Ellie's sleeping form on the other side of the dying fire, and her breathing slowly returned to normal. He had given her the best sleeping spot closest to the water. Farthest from the entrance was solid rock at her back. Even in sleep, he had positioned himself between her and any potential threat. The realization brought an unexpected tightness to her chest. Moving carefully to avoid waking him, Emma made her way to the spring. The water was shockingly cold against her sun-damaged skin, but she welcomed the sharp sensation. It reminded her that she was alive, that she had survived another night in a world that had tried repeatedly to break her. As she cupped the clear water in her hands, Emma caught sight of her reflection. The face staring back at her was almost unrecognizable, sunburn, gaunt, marked by exhaustion and trauma. But there was something else there too, something she hadn't seen in years. A spark of defiance that hadn't been completely extinguished. The desert changes people, Ellie's voice came softly from behind her. Sometimes it strips them down to who they really are underneath all the layers they've built up. Emma didn't turn around, but she saw his reflection join hers in the water. What if there's nothing underneath? What if the layers were all there was? Then you wouldn't have made it this far. She finally turned to face him in the pre-dawn light. His features were softer, more approachable than they'd seemed in the harsh glare of yesterday's sun. But his eyes still held that same steady compassion that had drawn her to follow him. You mentioned your grandfather, Emma said, settling back against the rocks. Do you have family nearby? Something shifted in Ellie's expression, a brief tightening around his eyes before the careful composure returned. Not anymore. The simple words carried a weight that Emma recognized. Loss. The kind that carved permanent hollow spaces inside a person, leaving them forever changed. I'm sorry, she said. Eli nodded slowly. Sarah, my wife, she used to say that grief was just love with nowhere to go. Took me a long time to understand what she meant. He gathered kindling for the fire, his movements precise and controlled. What about you? Anyone will be worried about where you are. The question hit Emma like a physical blow. Images flashed through her mind, her father's controlled rage when she tried to assert any independence. The way her stepmother had looked through her as if she were invisible. The cold formality of a house that had never been a home. No, she said finally. No one who actually cares whether I'm alive or dead. Just people who'll be angry that I left. Eli paused in his fire building, studying her face with those penetrating dark eyes. There's a difference between people missing you and people missing what you do for them. The observation was so accurate it took Emma's breath away. Her entire life had been about serving others' needs, fulfilling others' expectations, being what others required her to be. She'd been valued for her compliance, her silence, her willingness to disappear into whatever role was demanded of her. I was supposed to get married, she said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. To a man my father chose. A business arrangement disguised as a wedding. Ellie's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Supposed to. The ceremony was supposed to be yesterday. Emma laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I wonder if they went through with it anyway. Had someone stand in for the missing bride? Is that when you ran? Emma shook her head. I ran the night before, during the rehearsal dinner. Everyone was celebrating this wonderful union, toasting my future happiness. And all I could think about was how this was the last night I'd ever be able to make a choice for myself. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. I went upstairs, supposedly to fix my makeup. Instead, I climbed out the window and started walking. I didn't have a plan, didn't take anything except the clothes I was wearing. I just knew I couldn't go through with it. So you chose the desert over a cage, Eli said quietly. I chose the possibility of dying free over the certainty of living as someone else's property. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun crested the horizon, painting the red rocks in brilliant shades of gold and orange. Emma felt something loosening in her chest, the tight knot of secrets and shame that had been her constant companion for so long. What was her name? She asked. Your wife, Sarah Begay. We were married 15 years. Ellie's voice grew softer, more distant. She was a teacher at the reservation school. Wanted to make sure all the children knew their own language, their own stories. She sounds wonderful. She was. Eli poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. She would have liked you, would have seen what I see. What do you see? Eli met her eyes directly. Someone who chose courage over comfort, someone who's stronger than she knows. 3 days passed in the sanctuary of red rocks. Emma found herself settling into a rhythm she'd never experienced before, sleeping when tired, eating when hungry, speaking when she had something to say. There were no schedules to keep, no expectations to fulfill, no performances to maintain. Eli moved through the space with quiet efficiency, tending the fire, gathering food, maintaining their simple shelter. He never crowded her, never demanded conversation, but his presence was steady and reassuring, like a lighthouse in a storm. Emma thought, always there, but not controlling the waves. On the third evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors, Eli spoke a word she'd heard him murmur before, Wea. Emma looked up from the small pile of smooth stones. She'd been arranging a nervous habit she'd developed over the past few days. What does that mean? Wolf, Eli said simply. And I'm beside my language. Wolf. Emma's brow furrowed. Why do you call me that? Eli was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Wolves are pack animals, but sometimes one gets separated. Maybe the pack moves on. Maybe there's danger. Maybe the wolf just gets lost. When that happens, the lone wolf has to learn to survive differently. Has to be stronger, smarter, more careful. He gestured toward the vast desert stretching beyond their shelter. 3 days ago, I found a lone wolf who'd survived something that should have killed her. Still fighting, still moving forward, even when everything seemed hopeless. Emma felt her throat tighten. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about not being afraid, Eli said. It's about choosing to keep going when you are afraid. The word way has settled into Emma's consciousness like water soaking into parched earth. It felt different from her birth name, which had always belonged more to her father than to her. This name felt like something she could grow into, something that honored who she was becoming rather than who she'd been forced to be. Wea, she repeated, testing the sound on her tongue. If you like it, Eli said, names should be chosen, not just given. The simple statement hit Emma with unexpected force. In her world, everything had been predetermined: her education, her social circle, her future husband, even her opinions. The idea that she could choose something as fundamental as her own name felt revolutionary. I've never chosen anything important before, she admitted. Then this is a good place to start. That night, Emma dreamed of wolves running across endless plains, their voices lifted in songs of freedom and belonging. When she woke, the name felt like it had always been hers. Over the following days, Eli began teaching her practical skills: how to read the subtle signs that indicated water nearby, which plants could be eaten and which should be avoided, how to move quietly across loose sand and rocky terrain. The desert isn't cruel, he explained as they tracked the barely visible animal trail between the rocks. It's honest. It tells you exactly what it is and what it requires. No deception, no false promises. Emma found comfort in this honesty. After a lifetime of navigating hidden meanings and unspoken threats, The desert's straightforward challenges felt almost refreshing back there, she said one afternoon as they rested in the shade of a massive boulder. Everything was about appearances, what people would think, how things would look. Nothing was ever what it seemed. And now, Emma looked around at the star beauty surrounding them, the red earth, the endless sky, the hardy plants that bloomed despite the harsh conditions. Now I'm learning to see things as they really are, including yourself. The question hung in the desert air. Emma considered it seriously, watching a hawk circle overhead with lazy confidence. I'm starting to, she said finally. For the first time in my life, I'm starting to. Eli smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his weathered face, revealing the man he might have been before grief carved its lines. They're good, he said simply. That's the hardest part. After a week at the rock shelter, Eli made an unexpected suggestion. There are people I'd like you to meet, he said as they shared their morning meal. My community. They live about half a day's walk from here. Weia's hand froze halfway to her mouth, a piece of dried fruit trembling between her fingers. The thought of facing strangers, of being scrutinized and questioned, made her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. I don't think I'm ready for that, she said quietly. Eli nodded without surprise. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing to try. What if they don't want me there? What if they ask questions I can't answer? Then we leave, Eli said simply. Your choice. Always. The assurance helped, but didn't entirely calm Weia's nerves. She'd spent so many years being paraded before people who measured her worth by standards she couldn't control. The thought of being judged again, even by Ellie's people, felt overwhelming. But as the morning progressed, she found herself curious despite her fear. Eli spoke of his community with obvious affection, elders who carried old stories, children who laughed too loudly, women who wove blankets that told the history of their people in patterns and colors. They're not perfect, he said as they prepared to leave the shelter. No community is, but they're real. What you see is what they are. The walk took them across terrain that gradually shifted from stark desert to rolling hills dotted with juniper, trees and sagebrush. Weia found herself moving more confidently now, her feet sure on the uneven ground, her breathing steady despite the elevation changes. When they crested a low hill, Weia saw the village spread below them, a cluster of traditional hogans and more modern houses arranged around a central area, where several women sat weaving in the shade of a large ramada. Children played nearby, their voices carrying on the warm air like music. It's beautiful, Weia whispered. An elderly woman looked up as they approached, her weathered face breaking into a smile when she saw Eli. She spoke rapidly in Dain-Bazad, her tone both welcoming and gently scolding. Eli responded in the same language, gesturing toward Weia with obvious respect. This is my grandmother's sister, Alice, Eli said to Weia. She wants to know why I've been hiding you away like a miser, hoarding silver. Despite her nervousness, Weia found herself smiling. Tell her I needed time to remember how to be around people. Alice studied Weia with sharp, kind eyes while Eli translated. Then she nodded slowly and spoke again. She says the desert teaches us all different lessons. Eli interpreted. Some people learn to be hard like the rocks. Others learn to be resilient, like the plants that bloom after rain. She thinks you're learning to bloom. Throughout the afternoon, Weia found herself drawn into the quiet rhythm of village life. The women included her in their work without making her feel like an outsider, showing her how to prepare wool for spinning and explaining the meanings behind different patterns. Each design tells a story, explained Maria, a woman about Weia's age whose daughter played at their feet. This one represents the path between mountains, the journey from one safe place to another. Weia traced the intricate pattern with her finger. I think I'm still walking that path. We all are, Maria said gently. The path never really ends. It just takes us to new mountains. As evening approached, the community gathered for a simple meal. Weia sat beside Eli, acutely aware that she was the subject of curious but not unfriendly attention. When Alice asked her name, Weah hesitated only briefly before answering, Weah. Alice's eyebrows rose slightly. She looked between Weah and Eli, then spoke to him in rapid dyne. Ellie's response was quiet but firm. She wants to know if you understand what the name means, he told Weah. Wolf, Weah said, meeting Alice's gaze directly. A survivor. The elderly woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of approval. She says wolves know how to find their pack. Eli translated, when they're ready. 3 weeks in the village had transformed Weah in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her hands, once soft and manicured, now bore the calluses of honest work. Her skin had darkened under the desert sun, and muscles had developed in her arms and legs from daily tasks that required real strength, rather than mere appearance. More importantly, something fundamental had shifted inside her. The constant tension that had lived in her shoulders for years was gradually releasing, replaced by a quiet confidence she'd never known she possessed. You move differently now, Eli observed one morning as they walked to check the small garden the community maintained near a natural spring. Like you belong in your own body. Weah considered this as she bent to examine the squash plants Alice had asked her to tend. It was true. For most of her life, she'd felt like a stranger inhabiting someone else's form, always conscious of how she looked, how she moved, whether her posture conveyed the proper submission or grace. I feel different, she admitted. Stronger. More. Real is good, Eli said, settling beside her to examine the corn stalks. Real is honest. They worked in comfortable silence, their movements coordinated through weeks of shared tasks. Weah had learned that Eli was a man of few words but deep thoughts, someone who showed care through actions rather than declarations. When she struggled with a heavy water container, he was there to help before she asked. When nightmares woke her gasping in the darkness, he would quietly tend the fire until its warmth and light chased away her demons. Eli, she said, suddenly, not looking up from the plants she was watering. Why don't you live in the village with your family? His hand stilled on the corn leaves. She'd noticed that he always stayed slightly apart from the community, welcome but not quite integrated, as if he held himself at a careful distance from the warmth they offered. After Sarah and the children died, he said slowly, I couldn't bear to be around happiness. Other people's joy felt like mockery. Their sympathy felt like pity. So I left. But you come back. I visit. I help when they need me. But I don't participate, not the way I used to. Weah straightened, studying his profile. Because it hurts too much. Because I was afraid I'd forgotten how. Eli met her eyes. Until recently. The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to fully acknowledge. Weah felt her heart skip, understanding suddenly that her healing had somehow enabled his. That by caring for her, he'd begun to remember how to care for himself. The children here, she said carefully, they remind me what innocence looks like. What joy looks like when it isn't performed or calculated. That afternoon, young Tommy Begay had shown her a lizard he'd caught, his face bright with the simple pleasure of sharing something wonderful. In her old life, children had been obstacles to adult conversations, nuisances to be managed or displayed as accessories to their parents' success. Maria's daughter asked me yesterday if I was going to stay. Weah continued. I didn't know what to tell her. What do you want to tell her? Weah was quiet for a long moment, considering not just the question, but her right to want anything at all. For so long, her desires had been irrelevant, her preferences dismissed or overruled. The very act of wanting something felt dangerous, revolutionary. I want to stay, she said finally. I want to learn everything Alice can teach me about weaving. I want to help with the harvest. I want to be here when the winter stories are told. She paused, gathering courage. I want to belong somewhere. Ellie's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Then stay. Is it that simple? The best things usually are. He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. You don't need permission to choose your own life, Wea. You just need courage. As they walked back toward the village, Wea felt something she'd never experienced before, the deep satisfaction of being exactly where she was meant to be, with people who saw her as she truly was, not as property, not as an ornament, but as herself. The black SUVs appeared on the horizon like storm clouds, their polished surfaces reflecting the desert sun and harsh flashes that made Wea's eyes water. She was helping Maria hang laundry when she first spotted them. 3 vehicles moving in formation across the dirt road that led to the village. Something cold and familiar twisted in her stomach, fear. The kind of bone-deep terror she thought she'd left behind in her father's house. "Maria," she said quietly, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I need to find Eli." Maria followed her gaze to the approaching vehicles, her expression immediately shifting from casual curiosity to protective concern. In the weeks Wea had been with them, the community had come to regard her as family, someone to shelter and defend. "Go," Maria said simply. "I'll handle whatever this is." But Wea knew there would be no handling this. She recognized the calculated intimidation of the convoy, the way the vehicles moved with military precision. Her father had found her. She ran through the village, her heart hammering against her ribs. Eli was working with some of the men to repair a roof damaged by recent storms. When he saw her face, he immediately climbed down from the ladder. "What's wrong?" "They're here," Wea gasped. "My father's men, 3 black SUVs, coming fast." Eli's expression hardened instantly, without hesitation. He turned to the other men and spoke rapidly in Dine. They nodded grimly and began moving with purpose, some heading toward the approaching vehicles, others quietly ushering children and elders toward more secure areas. "Come on," Eli said, taking Wea's hand. "We need to get you somewhere safe now." The word came out sharper than Wea intended. No more hiding, no more running. Eli stopped, studying her face. "Wea, if these men are dangerous, they are dangerous, but not in the way you think." Wea straightened, feeling something fierce and unfamiliar rising in her chest. "They're dangerous because they believe they own me, because they think I'm property to be retrieved." The SUVs had reached the outskirts of the village now, their engines rumbling like mechanical predators. Doors slammed as men in expensive suits emerged, looking absurdly out of place in the desert landscape. Wea counted 6 of them, all carrying themselves with the casual arrogance of people accustomed to getting their way. Through intimidation, the man leading them was tall and silver-haired, his face bearing the kind of cold authority that had shaped Wea's entire childhood. Her father's lawyer, Marcus Hartwell. Behind him walked 2 men she recognized as her father's private security, and 3 others who looked like they could be law enforcement or military contractors. "Emma Catherine Blackwood," Hartwell called out, his voice carrying across the village with practiced legal authority. "Your father is very worried about you. It's time to come home." The name hit Wea like a physical blow. Emma Catherine Blackwood, the frightened, compliant girl she used to be. The one who said yes, father, and of course, father, and never, ever caused trouble. But that girl was gone. In her place stood Wea, wolf-named and desert-strong, surrounded by people who had chosen to protect her not because they owned her, but because they loved her. "My name is Wea," she called back, her voice carrying farther than she thought possible. "And I'm already home." Hartwell's mouth tightened with displeasure. "Miss Blackwood, you've caused your family considerable distress. Your father has been searching for you for over a month. Your fiancé is prepared to overlook this episode. If you return quietly." "My fiancé," Wea laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass. "You mean the man my father sold me to like livestock? You're being dramatic, Emma. Your father only wants what's best for you." Eli stepped up beside Wea, his presence solid and reassuring. Around them, she could see the community taking positions not aggressive, but clearly united in their intent to protect her. The lady said her name is Wea. Eli said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who belonged to this land. And she said she's home. Hartwell's gaze flicked dismissively over Eli before returning to Wea. Miss Blackwood, you're coming with us. This has gone on long enough. For a moment, Wea felt the old fear trying to reassert itself. The lifetime of conditioning that told her to comply, to submit, to avoid confrontation at all costs. But then, she felt Ellie's steady presence beside her, Silas watching from her doorway with fierce pride. Remembered Maria's immediate willingness to defend her. No, Wea said simply. I'm not. Hartwell's patience was clearly wearing thin. He gestured to one of the security men, who stepped forward with the confident stride of someone accustomed to physical intimidation. Miss Blackwood, we can do this. The easy way or the hard way, Hartwell said, his voice taking on the steel that had terrified Wea throughout her childhood. Your father has legal guardianship papers, and local law enforcement has been notified of your condition, my condition. Wea's voice rose with genuine incredulity. Mental breakdown, emotional instability following pre-wedding stress. Your father is prepared to have you committed for treatment if necessary. Hartwell's smile was cold as winter stone. He's very concerned about your well-being. The threat hit Wea like ice water. She'd seen her father use similar tactics before. Legal maneuvers disguised as concern, institutional control masquerading as care. The brilliance of it was sickening. Who would question a worried father, trying to help his troubled daughter? But even as the familiar panic clawed at her chest, Wea felt something new rising to meet it. Anger, pure, clean, righteous fury at the presumption that her choices could be dismissed as illness, that her freedom could be stolen in the name of her own good. I am not mentally ill, she said, her voice carrying across the village with crystalline clarity. I am not having a breakdown. I am a woman who chose to live a life I didn't want to live. Emma, you're not thinking clearly. Stop calling me that. The words came out like a whip crack. That name belongs to a frightened girl who let herself be controlled by fear. I am Wea now. I choose who I am, where I live, and how I spend my life. Alice stepped forward from her doorway, her weathered face set with determination. She spoke in dying, her voice carrying the authority of an elder. Though Wea couldn't understand all the words, their meaning was unmistakable. Asterisk, this woman is under our protection. Asterisk, other community members begin emerging from their homes, forming a loose but determined circle around Wea and Eli, not threatening, but unquestionably unified. Maria appeared with several other women, their arms crossed, and their expressions resolute. The men who had been working on the roof stood ready, their tools still in their hands. Hartwell's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. This is interference with a legal proceeding. We can have all of you arrested for obstruction. On whose authority? Eli asked quietly. His tone was calm, but Wea could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands hung loose and ready at his sides. This is sovereign land. Your jurisdiction ends at the border. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Hartwell's face. The legal complexities of tribal sovereignty weren't something he'd clearly considered. Emma. He tried again, his voice taking on a falsely paternal tone. Think about what you're throwing away. Your family's wealth, your social position, a secure future. All for what? To live in poverty in the middle of nowhere with people who barely speak English. The insult to her chosen family sparked something volcanic in Wea's chest. She stepped forward, no longer the cowering girl these men expected to intimidate. These people, she said, her voice ringing with conviction, see me as a human being, not as property. They've given me something your world never could, the freedom to discover who I really am. She looked directly at Hartwell, meeting his gaze without flinching. Tell my father that Emma Catherine Blackwood is dead. She died the night she climbed out the window, rather than marry a stranger. What stands before you now is Wea, woman, who belongs to no one but herself. Your father won't accept this. Then that's his choice. just as this is mine. Hartwell's jaw worked silently for a moment. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. The desert air thick with tension and possibility. Finally, he gestured sharply to his men. We'll be back with proper legal documentation. No, Weah said simply. You won't. Because I'll be ready for you. As the SUVs pulled away in a cloud of dust and frustrated anger, Weah felt something settle deep in her bones. For the first time in her life, she had stood her ground and won. The dust from the departing SUVs had barely settled when Alice approached Weah, her weathered hands reaching out to gently touch the younger woman's shoulders. The gesture was tender, maternal in a way that made Weah's eyes burn with unexpected tears. Sit, Alice said in English, guiding Weah to a wooden bench in the shade of the Ramada. Breathe. Only then did Weah realize she was trembling. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was ebbing, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the overwhelming realization of what had just occurred. She had faced down her father's representatives. She had claimed her own name, her own identity, her own life. Eli settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the solid warmth of his presence without being crowded. Around them, the community began to disperse, but not entirely. People lingered, offering quiet words of support, gentle touches to her hands or shoulders, small gestures that said, "You are one of us. We are proud of you." "I can't believe I did that," Weah whispered, her voice shaking. "I can," Maria said, approaching with a cup of water sweetened with honey. "You've been finding your strength for weeks. Today you just let it show." Weah accepted the water gratefully, her hands still unsteady. "They'll come back. Hartwell doesn't give up easily. And my father," she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Let them come," said Joseph, one of the village council members. His voice carried quiet authority. "We know our rights on sovereign land. We know the law. And we know how to protect our own. Our own. The words settled into Weah's heart like seeds in fertile soil. She had spent her entire life being in possession, an asset, something that belonged to someone else. Now, for the first time, she belonged somewhere by choice, and that somewhere belonged to her in return. "There's something I need to tell you all," Weah said, looking around at the faces gathered near her. "About who I was before. About what I'm running from." Alice waved a dismissive hand. "The past is the past. What matters is who you choose to be now. But you deserve to know what you're protecting me from," Weah insisted. "My father is wealthy, powerful. He's used to getting what he wants, and he has resources to make trouble for people who stand in his way." Eli spoke quietly. "What kind of resources?" Weah took a deep breath. "Political connections, legal influence, money to hire private investigators, security firms, lawyers who specialize in making problems disappear." She met his eyes. "I don't want any of you to suffer because of me, child," Alice said firmly. "We've been protecting our people from powerful men who think they own everything for longer than you've been alive. Your father is just another coyote making noise in the distance." The comparison drew chuckles from several community members, and Weah felt some of her tension ease. There was something deeply comforting about being surrounded by people who had faced down centuries of attempts to control and diminish them, and who remained unimpressed by displays of outside authority. "Besides," added Thomas, Alice's grandson, "you stood up to them. You didn't hide behind us or ask us to fight your battles. You faced them yourself and made your choice clear. That takes courage, and courage," Eli said softly, "is contagious." Weah looked at him questioningly, and he continued, "Watching you stand up for yourself, claim your own name, refuse to be defined by other people's expectations. It reminded me of things I've forgotten." "What things?" "That healing isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose to do." Ellie's voice grew stronger, more certain. "That belonging somewhere doesn't mean hiding from the world. It means having a place solid enough to stand on when you face whatever comes around them." The afternoon light was beginning to soften, painting the red rocks in warm gold. Children's laughter echoed from somewhere nearby, mixed with the low voices of women preparing the evening meal. The ordinary sounds of a community going about its daily life, a life that now included her. "So what happens now?" Wea asked. Alice smiled, the expression transforming her lined face. "Now we eat dinner. Tomorrow we continue living. And if those men come back, we'll be ready for them together." It was, Wea thought, the most beautiful plan she'd ever heard. 2 months had passed since Hartwell's visit, and autumn was beginning to paint the desert in deeper shades of gold and crimson. True to Alice's prediction, there had been no return visit from Wea's father's representatives. Whether it was the legal complexities of tribal sovereignty, the unwillingness to pursue a public confrontation, or simply the recognition that Wea would not be easily intimidated, the threats had faded like mirages in the desert heat. Wea had settled into the rhythm of village life with a completeness that sometimes surprised her. Her hands, once soft and decorative, now moved with skilled confidence as she worked Alice's loom, creating patterns that told stories of journeys and transformations. The blanket she was currently weaving incorporated traditional designs with subtle innovations of her own, a visual representation of how old wisdom could embrace new experiences. "You're getting good at that," Eli observed, settling beside her in the cool morning air. He carried the cups of coffee, the rich aroma mixing with the sage-scented breeze. "Alice is a good teacher," Wea replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "She says the wool remembers the sheep it came from, the earth it grazed on, the water it drank. Every thread carries those memories into the weaving." "And what memories are you weaving in?" Wea considered the question as she studied the emerging pattern on her loom. "Freedom, I think. The memory of choosing to walk into the desert rather than into a cage. The memory of finding people who see me as I am, not as they need me to be." Eli nodded slowly. In the months since Wea's arrival, he'd had undergone a quiet transformation. The rigid solitude he'd maintained since his family's death had gradually softened into something more flexible, more open to connection. He still spent time alone in the desert, but he also joined community meals, helped with village projects, and allowed himself to laugh at the children's jokes. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about building a more permanent dwelling. The shelter in the rocks served its purpose, but winter's coming, and it might be good to have something more substantial." Wea's hand stilled on the loom. They had been sharing the small guest hogan the community had offered her, with Eli maintaining a respectful distance by sleeping outside under the stars most nights. The arrangement worked, but it also held a careful formality that spoke of boundaries neither had been ready to cross. "Where were you thinking of building?" she asked. "There's a good spot near the spring, where the cottonwoods grow. Good shelter from wind, easy access to water." Eli paused, studying his coffee cup. "Room for a garden, space for a proper loom if someone wanted one." The offer hung between them, delicate as spider silk. Wea understood that he was asking not just about architecture, but about the shape of their shared future. The careful distance they'd maintained had been necessary while she healed, while she discovered who she was outside of her father's control. "But now, I'd like that," she said quietly. "A place we built together. A place that's ours by choice." Ellie's smile transformed his face, revealing the man he'd been before grief carved its lines. "There, I was hoping you'd say that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the village wake up around them. Maria emerged from her hogan to hang laundry, calling good-natured instructions to her daughter who was chasing the neighbor's cat. Joseph and several other men were discussing plans for the upcoming harvest celebration, their voices carrying the easy familiarity of lifelong friends. "I never thought I'd have this," Wea said suddenly. "What? A normal morning? Coffee with someone She paused, searching for words. "Someone I choose to be with. A community that includes me without trying to control me. Work that matters to me instead of work that's expected of me." Eli reached over and covered her hand with his. The gesture was simple, natural, but it sent warmth spreading through Wei's chest. His hands were calloused from honest work, scarred from years of living close to the land. But they held hers with infinite gentleness. "You deserve all of this," he said. "You always did. You just needed to find your way to a place where people could see it." "We found our way to each other," Wei corrected. "To lost wolves who learned they didn't have to stay lost." "Maybe that's how it works," Eli mused. "Maybe healing isn't something you do alone. Maybe it's something you do together." The first snow of winter dusted the red rocks like sugar on bread as Wei and Eli put the finishing touches on their new home. It had taken 3 months to build, with help from the entire community flowing as naturally as water finding its course. Joseph and the other men had helped with the heavy timber work, while the women had shared knowledge about the best clay for chinking walls and which plants to gather for winter medicines. But it was truly Wei and Ellie's creation, every beam placed with intention, every stone chosen with care. The main room faced east to catch the morning light, with large windows that framed the desert landscape like living paintings. A traditional fire pit occupied the center, surrounded by seating areas perfect for storytelling and quiet conversations. Wei's loom held a place of honor near the south window, where the light was best for detailed work. Already, several half-finished pieces hung from its frame, blankets that would keep them warm through the winter, rugs that would soften the wooden floors, wall hangings that would remind them of the journey that brought them here. "It's perfect," Wei said, standing in the doorway and surveying their finished work. The house felt completely different from the mansion where she'd grown up, smaller, simpler, but infinitely more real. Every corner held meaning, every surface bore the mark of their shared labor. Eli emerged from the kitchen area, where he'd been installing the last of the hand-carved shelves. Wood shavings clung to his hair, and his shirt was dusty with sawdust, but his smile was radiant. "Alice wants to know if we're ready for the blessing ceremony," he said. Wei had nodded. The community had offered to formally bless their new home according to traditional customs, a ritual that would welcome good spirits and ensure harmony between the dwelling and the land it sat upon. The idea of starting their life together with such ceremony felt deeply right to Wei, a formal recognition of how far she traveled from the frightened woman who'd stumbled into the desert a year ago. As evening approached, their friends and chosen family began gathering outside the house. Alice arrived carrying a bundle of sage and sweetgrass, while Maria brought a pot of her famous stew to share after the ceremony. The children ran around the yard, their laughter mixing with the adults' conversation in a symphony of community warmth. Alice stepped forward as the group formed a circle around the house's entrance. She spoke in dying, her voice carrying the weight of prayers spoken by countless generations. Though Wei understood only fragments of the words, their meaning was clear. May this dwelling be filled with peace. May those who live here find joy. May the love that built these walls protect all who enter. When Alice finished, she turned to Wei and Eli. "Now you speak your intentions for this place. What do you want it to become?" Wei looked at Eli, then at the faces surrounding them, people who had become her family not through blood or law, but through choice and love. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly in the still winter air. "I want this to be a place where people can come to heal," she said. "Where anyone who's lost their way can find shelter and acceptance. Where traditional wisdom and new ideas can grow together." Eli stepped closer to her, his hand finding hers naturally. "I want it to be a place where love lives freely, where we remember that home isn't just a building, it's the people you choose to build a life with." Thomas, Alice's grandson, began singing a traditional song of blessing, and one by one, the others joined in. The melody rose and fell like wind through the canyons, ancient and eternal. Wei felt the sound wash over her, through her, connecting her to something larger than herself. As the ceremony concluded and people began moving inside to share the evening meal, Wei paused on the threshold of her new home. Behind her lay the path that had brought her here, through pain and fear, through courage and discovery, through the grace of finding people who saw her worth. Ahead lay whatever came next, but she would face it from a place of strength, surrounded by love, rooted in choice rather than obligation. She was finally, truly home. Spring returned to the desert with a riot of wildflowers, scarlet paintbrush, golden poppies, and purple lupines carpeting the hills in colors so vibrant they seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Waya knelt among them, gathering medicinal plants Alice had taught her to identify, her basket slowly filling with treasures that would heal and comfort. 2 years had passed since she'd first stumbled into this landscape, desperate and nameless. Now she moved through it with the confidence of someone who belonged, reading the subtle signs that spoke of weather changes, animal movements, and the ancient rhythms that governed all life here. The desert teaches patience above all else. Alice had told her just that morning as they worked together in the garden. It shows us that beautiful things take time to grow, and that the most precious gifts often come disguised as hardships. Waya smiled at the memory, understanding now what the older woman had meant. Her own transformation hadn't happened overnight, it had been a gradual blooming, like the plants that waited years for the perfect conditions to flower spectacularly. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up. Eli emerged from behind a cluster of Joshua trees, carrying his own gathering basket and wearing the easy smile that had become as familiar to her as breathing. "Find anything good?" he asked, settling beside her among the flowers. "Everything's good today," Waya replied, showing him the healing plants she'd collected. The winter rains were generous. The earth is practically singing with life. They worked together in comfortable silence, their movements synchronized through countless shared tasks. Waya marveled, not for the first time, at how naturally they fit together to people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, when both were ready to heal and be healed. A year ago, they had formalized their commitment in a ceremony that blended dying traditions with their own personal promises. There had been no legal documents, no business arrangements, no negotiations between families seeking advantage, just to people choosing each other freely, witnessed by a community that celebrated love in all its authentic forms. "I got a letter yesterday," Eli said quietly, breaking the peaceful silence. Waya looked up, recognizing the careful tone he used for delicate subjects. "Oh, from a social worker in Phoenix. She heard about the work we're doing here, the shelter for people recovering from trauma, the traditional healing programs. She wants to know if we consider taking in a young woman who's been in a situation similar to yours." Waya's hand stilled on the plants she was gathering. Over the past year, word had somehow spread about the sanctuary they created, not just their home, but the broader community's willingness to shelter those who needed healing. They'd welcomed 3 other women so far, each carrying her own burden of pain and hope. "What's her story?" Waya asked. "Forced marriage, family honor. She managed to escape, but has nowhere to go and no one who understands." Ellie's voice was gentle. "She's about 19, I think, scared to trust anyone." Waya closed her eyes, remembering her own desperation. The way kindness without agenda had seemed impossible to believe. "When can she come?" "You don't want to discuss it first? Think it over." "No." Waya's response was immediate and certain. "If she needs sanctuary, she has it. That's what this place is for." Ellie's smile was radiant. "I love who you've become, Waya. Who you've always been underneath everything else." The name settled around her like a blessing. Waya Wolf, survivor, the one who had learned to run toward freedom rather than away from fear. She had chosen this identity, claimed it, made it real through her actions and choices. As they walked home through the blooming desert, baskets full of healing plants and hearts full of purpose, Waya reflected on the strange gift of her journey. She had lost everything she'd once thought defined her family name, social position, financial security. The identity others had constructed for her died in return. She had gained everything that actually mattered: the freedom to choose her own path, love that asked nothing of her but authenticity, work that fed her soul, and a community that saw her as she truly was. The desert stretched endlessly around them, no longer a place of exile but a landscape of infinite possibility. Somewhere out there, another lost soul was making her way towards sanctuary. Whale would be ready to welcome her home. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next story.